Jeremy and Joe, on Wednesdays we chat with Joe Marino, Locked on Bills podcast, and everywhere you see Joe, Locked on NFL Scouting, Bills Squad with me and Jerry Ostrowski as well. Mr. Marino, good morning.
Good morning, guys. Schedule release day is finally here. We don't have to speculate anymore.
Well, Monday Night Football between the Chiefs and Giants, anticipating Gabe Davis against the Chiefs again, obviously. That's going to be the gift there. Joe, instant reaction to Gabe to the Giants. There are some Bills fans that did want this reunion for the Bills. There are plenty that did not. The Giants would seem to make total sense. A reunion there and a wide receiver room that probably needs a little bit of a addition on the outside.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense for both parties. First of all, the Giants, they need some help at wide receiver. They need that skill set as well. You know, look at their receivers. It's Malik Neighbors, Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson. That's your top three. Those are all smaller, shiftier guys. And so inserting a Gabe Davis, bigger body, ball skills, size down the field, I think is kind of a missing skill set that really fits there. And, you know, the Giants don't have much in the way of cap space. They're sitting at, a little over $1 million, and based on the offset language that's going to exist with Gabe Davis, they can pay him a minimum salary. He's still going to get like $11.5 million from the Jaguars, and so from a money perspective, from a Giants perspective, and then Gabe Davis obviously has to be the opportunity to go there has to be appealing to him for targets, for familiarity with Brian Daboll, Chad Hall's there, Shea Tierney's there. A lot of familiarity. I think it's a good spot for Gabe and the Giants.
The Giants schedule continues to come out. Week 6, Thursday Night Football, Eagles at Giants. Just going to update these along the way. Art Stapleton on that. Like, really, the whole Giants schedule might slide
coming
in.
out one by one over the next 2 hours.
And I'm not sure how that'll affect the Bills schedule. They don't play the Giants, but some of their opponents would kind of line up that way. Joe, how about for the Bills schedule? You know, one thing, sometimes people might make fun of it. Hey, we already know who they're playing. Who cares about the order? But one thing we do know is that for the Bills, man, if a schedule could possibly set up for a team, if you want to say difficulty, sure, the Bills don't have a particularly difficult schedule, and most of their tough tests are at home. And then there's the travel element of it. Well, they will travel the second fewest miles in the NFL this year. Only Cincinnati travels less. If you're Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane, everybody is a part of this organization, you got to be loving how this schedule likely lines up.
Well, yeah, and you hear Sean McDermott talk about the thing that he looks for when he sees a schedule is where does the routine become inconsistent? And we know that the Bills are going to face a lot of primetime games playing at night, Thursday nights. I'm sure there'll be a couple of those Monday nights. That's all going to happen. And so obviously that's disruptive for their routines as people that are creatures of habit. And I think the minimal travel certainly helps them stay on schedule as much as possible. And so you get your tough ones at home. You get all the good quarterbacks at home. You got light travel. Got a big opportunity here to take advantage of what appears to be a pretty good path forward to being a high seed and going on another deep playoff run.
The stat of the day we've got for you is that the Chiefs will travel more for their opener than the Bills will for the season. 10,600 miles round trip for the Chiefs to go to Brazil, and for the Bills, that's the number for the season.
Yeah. Joe, how do you view their strength of schedule this year? It's depending on where you look. If you look at it through Super Bowl odds or last year's record, it's almost always one of the easier schedules in the league. And you just spoke to how a lot of the tough ones are at home. Man, that road schedule, I mean, it has me thinking a little bit about the 1 seed, not like, every second of the day, but I do feel like the way it's lining up, this could, one would hope that this would be the year that they could finally do that. It's the one thing they haven't done in the regular season.
Yeah, we've never seen the Bills go on a playoff run with Josh Allen as the number 1 seed, which obviously is the only seed that gets you a bye. And McDermott's undefeated off the bye, if I'm not mistaken. That seems very helpful, not only for the opportunity to rest and prepare, but also you now make all the rest of the AFC slate play all of the rounds of the playoffs. And, the Bills have had some issues with injuries kind of late in the season, like most teams do, and having to play marquee opponents without key players on defense in particular, all of that seems very, very helpful. And they'll have their chances to get tiebreakers, right? They go head-to-head against Kansas City and Baltimore and Houston. And, of course, we'll see what happens with the Bengals this year. So it's all right there. They'll have the opportunity to claim it. They'll have to win games, not have the hiccups. Right, a couple of years ago, they had some disappointing losses to marginal teams with bad quarterbacks. So hopefully it all can come together for the Bills, give them a great path to be the 1 seed, go all the way, and close out Highmark Stadium with maybe the AFC Championship game.
Yeah, there's the Highmark final season element to it. The other one unique element to the roster construction and the schedule, Joe, would be the pair of 6-game suspensions for Michael Hoecht and Larry Ogunjobi, and we'll get a good third of the season where we watch the Bills play without them. I know some Bills fans might be looking for hopefully some lighter opponents in those spots. How do you anticipate they might juggle that with Hoecht and Ogunjobi missing that time?
Yeah, it's such a strange dynamic because you're going to prepare for the season with those guys, and then they go away for 6 weeks, and then they come back, and who knows what the defense is going to look like. You'd like to think that 6 weeks into the year you're pretty aware of who you are, like what your issues are, what's going to work, what's not going to work, and now you have two not insignificant additions to the rotation, and so I'm hopeful that those guys as veterans, it'll be kind of a seamless transition. But then there's also the piece of the roster spot. Where do you get the roster spot? You got to let 2 players go, and maybe injuries take care of that. Maybe it's very difficult with how to do some gymnastics to make that work. You got a couple of young defensive tackles and Dwayne Carter and Deion Walker, the 4th-round pick. If they're playing well, you don't want to disrupt that and, have a, quote-unquote hamstring or calf strain or stub toe, something like that, where they go on IR and now you disrupt their progress. So I guess we'll have to take it in stride and see how it goes. You certainly hope that the opponents that you feel would be most beneficial to have them around aren't part of your early season schedule. And I think a lot about the AFC North for a number of reasons. First of all, those are all teams, whether it's the Steelers, Ravens, Browns, not so much the Bengals, but they're all teams that will play heavier personnel, multiple tight ends. They'll use a fullback. So you'd love to have, in particular, Michael Hoecht, who I think will matter a ton against those heavier personnel teams, but also Larry Ogunjobi, a guy that spent his entire 8 years in the AFC North, right? And there's been a lot of coaching stability in that division. And so I think he'd be a major asset, and the Bills face the entire AFC North this year. So hopefully those AFC North opponents come a little bit later in the year so you can maximize, Ogunjobi and then, of course, Michael Hoyt's skill set against those bigger personnel teams.
Joe Marino with us. The game that there's a little bit of smoke of is maybe that the Bengals could be that week 1 opponent. I know you just said they're one of the teams that doesn't necessarily play heavier personnel on offense, but if that were to be their opponent, Joe, week 1, what kind of measuring stick do you see that as for the Bills defense? Because it is very early in the season, and you don't know what you are, but that also is an offense that the Bills have had a lot of trouble with in their 2 full meetings with Sean McDermott as head coach.
Yeah, it's been 9 quarters of the Bills' defense against Joe Burrow. It's not looked good at all. Looks like Joe Burrow can dice him up and do whatever he wants. And so I do think it's a good call out, Joe, that this could be a measuring stick, because I feel like a lot of the moves the Bills have made to get more athletic, really throughout their defense, get younger and more athletic at multiple spots, is what you're hoping to be part of what can close that gap in terms of how your defense has looked against an offense like the Bengals, where you can play faster, you can get quicker pressure on the quarterback, play tighter coverage, and hopefully the Bills players that they've added can help with that. That surely should be the intent. The Bills struggle with kind of defending the quick passing game, and that's what Burrow does. It's West Coast, 3 steps, read the field, get it out of your hands. He's accurate. He's got good receivers. And so that's a tough challenge. Now, if the Bills do get the Bengals in week 1, I think everyone's aware of the struggles that Cincy's had in week 1. They've lost their last 3 week 1 games. Under Zach Taylor, they're 1-5 in week 1. But obviously that's something they're keenly aware of as well, where that'll probably be a big point of their messaging and emphasis throughout the offseason, is that we've not been able to win in week 1. Let's not put ourselves in a hole. I think part of that's been Joe Burrow's been hurt, right? At the beginning of the season, and doesn't really get a normal off season, especially throughout camp and preseason. And then, he's ready to go for the year, but maybe he's not repped to the point where he can play his best football. And then they have a big hole to climb out of. They get close and then don't get there. They got a lot of questions about their defense as well. So I think it'd be a fun week 1 game, especially at home. Sunday Night Football, 2 of the best quarterbacks in the league. I think that'd be a fun way to start the year.
Looking at Cincinnati, the Trey Hendrickson storyline is right there. Joe, do you look at last year for them as they had a bad month, and had they made the playoffs, would their story be different? They didn't miss by much, and we had been charting that. If they make the playoffs, do they maybe, not without saying like they beat the Bills, but do they win a game? Do they maybe raise some trouble, even though their defense was such a mess?
Yeah, I remember thinking to myself, I hope the Bengals don't get in because I don't want to play them. They're just going to be able to score, and obviously defensively they were a mess, and I'm not sure they're in any better shape. They switch out their coordinator, and I would not argue that their personnel is any better, especially if they can't get things figured out with Hendrickson, who's absolutely their best defensive player and one of the best defensive players in the league. I think that's fair. They close out what they win 5 in a row, and if they were to go into the postseason, the narrative would have been, they scratched and clawed and figured it out, and they're a resilient team, and the hype train would be off the charts for this year. But they stalled out. They go 9-8. They missed the playoffs 2 years in a row, and now the questions intensify. So they're a good example of how the margins can be so slim in the NFL. But they earned that. I mean, they had 2 different stretches where they dropped 4 out of 5 games. Yeah, you just can't do that in the NFL where every game counts. It's only 17 of them. You can't have 2 stretches like that and expect to get out of it, especially in a conference like the AFC where there's so many good quarterbacks.
And it's funny, like the Bengals defense catches a lot of flack, and we might see Bills-Bengals week 1. We might. Is it Burrow that really is the slow starter? He had a 5-interception game against the Steelers. They lost a game to the Jacoby Brissett Patriots.
They scored 3 against Cleveland 2 years ago.
You feel like that shouldn't happen to a Joe Burrow offense.
Yeah, I agree. What is he's had just injuries, right? The calf, didn't he have some type of medical deal? And I think that takes away from his ability to execute early in the season. But when the switch flips for Joe Burrow, I think he executes the passing game as high as at the highest level of any quarterback in the league in terms of executing a passing offense. So, it's just a matter of when he hits his stride, and then the guy plays at such a high level, but he's not been positioned well to play his best football earlier in the year. And they've started really poorly the last several years.
To your point, that 23 season where they scored 3 points in the opener against Cleveland, he had 82 yards passing in that game. But Joe, to your point, he had that was the year he had the calf strain and missed like all of training camp. So he might have been 1 week of practice, honestly, before he even got in there. So,
one quick schedule note: Lions-Packers week 1, 4:25. This, to me, is the first maybe look at how we can start to look at the Bills. They're not playing at 4:25 week 1. It's either Sunday 1 or prime time, right? 4:25 Lions-Packers on Fox. Like it's a huge window game. The Bills are not competing with Lions-Packers in week 1. I think that pushes the Bills to Sunday Night Football meter higher because I want to knock out the 4 o'clock spot on Sunday week 1. So something to consider. Joe, rookie camp. We just wrapped that up. What'd you see? Would you read about, hear about, see from whether it's Max Harrison or any of the other guys to come out of rookie camp that leaves you with an impression of the Bills rookie class?
Sounds like the big emphasis has been Jackson Hawes, the blocking tight end that's out there catching all these passes, which is a nice wrinkle. You certainly didn't watch him at Georgia Tech and think impact coming as a receiver, kind of a baseline skill set, dump and run type tight end, find space in zones. But, if there's a receiving profile there, that gets pretty exciting. Obviously, there's so much to play out, but that's certainly a fun storyline to come out. Good to hear about Dorian Strong, the Bills 6th-round pick out of Virginia Tech at corner. Highly experienced player, almost 3,000 snaps of defense at Virginia Tech. You could tell that probably helped him quite a bit stepping in and looking comfortable by reports. And then sounds like Maxwell Harrison, obviously the movement skills certainly pop. You can see the video coming out, realize that guy moves differently than anyone else. But, maybe his head's spinning a little bit, trying to get comfortable with the technique. And, I'm sure there's a lot that goes into being a top pick. And when you're at rookie camp, you're supposed to be the guy, right? And so, looks like he's got to obviously get a little bit more comfort. But it'll come, right? It's OTAs will be fired up here in a couple weeks, and we'll get more and more of a feel for where these guys are lining up, what opportunities are going to be there, and obviously really good competition throughout this roster, particularly in the defensive backfield. So should be exciting to see how it plays out, and if these young guys can make some noise and maybe bump some of these veterans off the roster.
Two guys you've had a chance to go through the tape of, the available, by the way, on Joe's Substack for this. The final two draft picks for the Bills, Chase Lunt, the offensive lineman from UConn, and then Caden Prather, the receiver, who we've mentioned here and there, the 7th-round pick. Would you see cliff notes on both of them? And then on Prather, like, I don't think this would really be, much of a take, but his path to making the roster, I would assume, would be he's got to show that he could play on special teams.
Yeah, I think that's going to be important. For Chase Lunt, it's the movement skills. The guy really is a fluid mover that excels getting out in space, the zone blocking, has the foot speed to frame these pass rushers and stay square. You can just tell he just doesn't have much length, and that's going to be tricky for him. He really wants to be early with his hands, and sometimes when you try to be early with your hands, you get overextended, and he doesn't have much wingspan to begin with, and so it's not a good spot to play from a recovery position. So I'm real fascinated to see where that goes, because I'm not sure he has the length to play outside. He's almost 6'8". That's a little bit unusual to play guard. So we'll see what they have in mind. I think he might have an uphill climb to stick. And then Caden Prather, he's got really good size, and he's very linearly explosive, which is pretty exciting. You see some nice vertical work in terms of being able to separate down the field and track the football. I think for him, it just comes down to developing more of his route running profile. A guy that's going to have to develop his release package. He likes to kind of lose ground with that first step and offer a lot of surface area to the corner. So he'll need to figure that out. I think he's got to develop his route tree. He's got to develop how he gets in and out of breaks. But I think there's a nice foundation of size, linear speed, ball tracking skills that can give him a chance. It's just going to be a matter of how does he get on this roster? Because I think the Bills are going to roster 5, and that would be Shakir, Coleman, Palmer, Samuel, and Moore, you would think. And then there's this group of Jalen Virgil and Tyrell Shavers and Laviska Shenault, where they'd have to keep 6, it would appear, and you'd also have to beat out some guys that have some specialization and some time, right? Whether it's Shavers and Virgil were part of the mix last year, Shavers now 2 years, and you have Laviska Shenault, who has this kick return ability, and time with Chris Tabor, the new special teams coordinator. So I think he's got an uphill climb, but he'll have the opportunity to prove himself in the coming weeks.
Joe Marino, Locked On Bills podcast, Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and Bill Squad with me and Jerry O, Mondays and Thursdays at noon on YouTube. Thanks, Joe. Enjoy the schedule and enjoy the release.
And we'll hit you up when we know when the Charlotte game is, so we can get a golf round in.
Yes, that's what we're going to do. We're not just going to golf. We're going to do a Joe Marino meet and greet, big party. The Mafia is going to take over that stadium.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the host of Locked On Panthers already called it a home game for Buffalo.
Very good.
Julian Council put that on Twitter.
Very good.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, guys.
All right.